Hi everyone, my name is Anna Holder and I am an environmental scientist with the California State Water Resources Control Board in our Office of Information Management and Analysis. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you all about how we've been working to operationalize open science and equity principles into our statewide surface water ambient monitoring programs. Before I do, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge tribal lands in California and state my deep gratitude for the ancestral and native homelands where I do this work in a place called Sacramento, California. Sacramento was and still is a gathering place for many local tribes who have lived throughout the Central Valley and the foothills for generations and were the original stewards of these lands and waters. These people include the Nishnaan, Maidu, and Miwok peoples and the Putwin and Wintun nations who've remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. I would also like to acknowledge that this conference, which is located in Grand Rapids, Michigan, is the ancestral homelands of the Peora and Ottawa peoples. And it's important for me to take a moment to acknowledge and recognize these peoples and that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In acknowledging and remembering these communities and all of the work that I do, I hope to honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants. And if you want to learn more about the land you're on, I highly recommend checking out nativeland.ca. During our time together, I am going to provide a brief orientation of the California Water Boards and our Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, or SWAMP. We're going to go over some equity and open science principles that I use in my work and describe how we've been working to put those principles into practice with 2 SWAMP programs. It's important to note that some of the equity principles I'll discuss might feel heavy or uncomfortable for some of us. In no way am I trying to make us experts in these topics by the end of our time together. Some folks spend entire careers learning about components of a single topic. My hope is that together we can begin to normalize having these conversations and get curious about how we might bring these principles back into the important work that we all do. So I invite everyone to take a deep breath and let's dive in. First, taking the high-level view of things, it's important to note that the California Water Boards is actually comprised of 10 separate state agencies. I work for the State Water Board, or the State Water Resources Control Board, which is represented by that teeny tiny red star over Sacramento near the center of the map. The State Water Board has duties that cover water quality, water rights, drinking water, and so much more. And just like our organizational charts, the data systems and infrastructure behind our many programs are large and complex. This graphic is actually out of date, and I believe it's become even more complicated over time, which, as you might guess, can make it quite difficult to manage and share data openly. I'm happy to say that California has been on an open data journey, as I like to put it, for quite some time. The statewide push was formalized with legislation in 2016, which was known as the California Open and Transparent Water Data Act. And a lot has happened since then, as you can see on this slide. But I want to highlight that the State Water Board has passed an open data resolution in 2018 and a racial equity resolution in November of 2021. And these 2 resolutions inform and guide the majority of the work that I do. SWAMP has embraced these resolutions and actively works to operationalize them in the work that we do. I often think about James Clear's quote from Atomic Habits: "We do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems." And a lot of the work that I do is to try and take these broad and sometimes seemingly abstract goals and values and directives and objectives and implement them into our everyday systems. So for me, I ask questions like, how can we make each part of our data lifecycle truly open and accessible to all? How can we make our programs and services more equitable? And which parts need to be dismantled or discontinued to achieve the equitable outcomes that we're all looking for? More on those questions later. The Office of Information Management and Analysis, or OIMA, as we like to call ourselves, is non-regulatory and has a few different broad categories in its scope. We support the rest of the organization with making data and information open and accessible. We generate and manage our own data through our surface water ambient monitoring programs, and we invest in community monitoring and data engagement. And because of the nature of all of our work, we are always looking for and developing new partnerships within the water data community in California and beyond. The Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, or SWAMP, was established by the California Legislature in 2000 to develop a comprehensive statewide surface water quality monitoring program to assess the condition of California's surface waters and watersheds. Historically, we've been focused on increasing our understanding of the current status and trends associated with each program, but when possible, we also collect data to inform problem identification, diagnostics, and evaluation topics. There are 4 statewide monitoring programs, as well as regional monitoring programs at each of the 9 regional water boards. Today, the case studies I'll be discussing will be from the statewide bioaccumulation monitoring program, which monitors contaminant concentrations like mercury in fish tissue to inform folks on which fish are safer to eat in which water bodies in California. And we'll also be talking about the statewide freshwater harmful algal bloom program, which is primarily a response program at this point, but it helps inform folks on which water bodies are safe to, and unsafe to use in the event of a harmful algal bloom. With all of that in mind, let's switch gears a bit and begin to talk about equity. Many of us have probably seen some version of this graphic, which nicely illustrates the difference between equality and equity. Equality means that each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. So in the image, we see that each person has the same number of crates to stand on to watch the baseball game. Equity recognizes that each person and or group of people has different circumstances and allocates the resources and opportunities needed to achieve equal outcomes. So in the graphic, we see that one person doesn't have any crates, whereas one person has 1 crate and one person has 2 crates, so everyone can see the game. Except for me, we can't really dive deeply into this discussion of how we operationalize equity until we understand and acknowledge a few other concepts. First up is positionality and intersectionality. Positionality speaks to how our respective identities influence how we see, understand, and experience the world. Intersectionality refers to the complex way intersecting identities can impact the cumulative discrimination and oppression individuals or groups may experience. The graphic on the slide walks us through an example of intersectionality quite nicely. We see that 21% of corporate leaders in the United States are women, only 4% of those are women of color, and only 1% of those are Black women. These specific statistics are from the corporate world, but we can see, and many of us already experience, these intersectional impacts in the science world as well. Next, let's talk about privilege and power dynamics. Many of us may already be aware of privilege and power in an individual sense, but I'd like to point out that these dynamics also exist in institutions and systems. So for me, it's important to understand the societal privilege and power that I experience as a white, educated woman because of those identities and because of the institutions and systems I work within and represent. It's also important for me to understand and remember that the historical and unjust actions of individuals and institutions that I represent resulted in generational burdens and sometimes generational trauma that communities still grapple with today. Redlining is an example of this. For those that don't know, redlining was a racist land use practice that was implemented throughout the United States in the 1930s, in which federal and local governments and financing entities systematically denied public and private financial services to Black communities and other people of color. These redlined areas are, to this day, highly correlated with persistent environmental and social injustices. Now, there's a lot to unpack with that example that we don't have time to cover today. But if you want to learn more, I recommend checking out the Cali PA Pollution and Prejudice Story Map. It is important to note that power in and of itself is not good or bad. It's all about how we use it. So there are actually 4 types of power that I want to break down with you today. When we think of unjust power dynamics, stuff that I described previously, we're generally thinking about power over, which operates to privilege some while marginalizing others. Power with, to, and within are good types of power. Power with is about building collective strength. Think of empowering one another. Power to refers to each person's individual ability to shape the world around them. And power within refers to a person's sense of this ability and their own self-worth. In the data and science context, we see that environments and cultures that value power over, so on the left column here, tend to hoard data and information, exclude individuals and groups in the name of efficiency, and do most of their work in silos. Environments and cultures that value power with, so on the far right side, tend to share data and information openly, include others to increase effectiveness, and do their work in connected systems. For me, understanding the concepts of positionality, intersectionality, privilege, and power help me not only understand the concept of equity more deeply, but help me understand how I can operationalize equity principles into my work, why I might experience other people's feelings or general resistance when it comes to putting these principles into practice. And really, it helps me connect the dots and understand the importance and urgency of incorporating diversity and inclusion in all of the work that I do. Now, increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion are critical, but for me, that's where we start in this work. I believe that getting everyone to a sense of belonging should be our goal. Now, belonging is not fitting in. Belonging is so much more than that or just being included. It's the knowing deep in our bones that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. We're able to show up authentically, and we can show up authentically and know that we're not only just physically and psychologically safe to do so, but we're celebrated and valued for it. In our graphic, the 3 people that were helping us understand equality and equity before are now in team attire. They're not just watching the game, they're part of the team. It's been my experience that once people truly feel they belong, that's when we start to see exciting innovation and engagement, and when we begin to see more equitable and impactful teams, organizations, communities, and outcomes. So now let's connect all of that to why we're here in this session, open science. Many of us, when we think about open science, are probably thinking of it from a technical perspective. So that's making process, data, code, publications, and so much more transparent and available on websites, databases, GitHub repositories, and through open access journals. When it comes to operationalizing equity, I like to think about open science from a relational perspective. So for me, the true spirit and ethos of open science sits at this really awesome nexus of open and transparent data and methods, like we discussed previously, effective and impactful communication, and putting the principles of equity, inclusion, and belonging into practice. Dr. Julie Lowndes, co-founder of OpenScapes, articulates this nicely in her contribution to the Scientific American back in 2019. Open science is not just about improving the way we share data and methods. It is also about improving the way we think, work, and interact with each other. It's about technology enabling social infrastructure that can promote inclusivity to create kinder science. Now, let's circle back to California's surface water ambient monitoring programs and talk about how we begin to operationalize these principles into our work. Again, we're going to focus on the statewide bioaccumulation monitoring program and the freshwater harmful algal bloom programs as case studies, and those are indicated here in the orange boxes. Generally speaking, we focus on 4 things when we put these principles into practice. First, we review and think through our processes and try and identify what's working and serving us and what needs to be reimagined and revised or completely dismantled and rebuilt. We make time and space for building trust and strengthening existing relationships and continue to build new relationships and partnerships. And we prioritize user needs, invest in user-centered design, and develop resources and tools to support effective and impactful communication. And finally, we do our best to make our data and information open and accessible using open science principles and software. So next, we're going to walk through each of these quadrants for both of our case studies so I can show you what this has looked like for us in a practical sense. When we were reviewing the workflow for our freshwater harmful algal bloom program, we knew there was a lot that can be improved in terms of automating and streamlining parts of the process in our systems and expanding it to better and more explicitly incorporate our tribal and community partners that conduct regular freshwater harmful algal bloom monitoring. This has meant expanding and modernizing our database. We blew it up, y'all. In the diagram on the slide, the blue parallelograms represent tables in our database. In the top before panel, we had a single table and a mostly manual workflow, individuals sending emails and writing things by hand. By modernizing our database, we now have at least 7 tables that will make it a truly relational and flexible database that can better support and more efficiently support the program and our many partners. And that's indicated by the big jumble of things in the after panel below. Now, we didn't want to modernize our database without ground truthing our priorities, ideas, and long-term vision with our key partners. This involved working with the Internet of Water to convene our review committee, which was comprised of tribes and non-governmental organizations who regularly monitor FHABs in California. And we also partnered with the Commons to help build systems that these tribes and community groups and others could access to easily share their data with us. And together we developed the framework that you see on the right, which outlines the process we've begun taking to do this work, the needs and priorities of our partners, and the ultimate direction we're taking with this project. The Commons has really helped us develop a data system with user needs at the forefront. They built on their already existing application called Water Reporter and worked with us to customize it for the needs of the FHAB program. We presented mock-ups of this application to our review committee back in March, and the Water Reporter team is hard at work incorporating their feedback and making the mock-ups a reality. Now, although we've been working on this project since 2019 and potentially much longer for others, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still so much more work to do. We intend on incorporating the data that are submitted to the Water Reporter application directly into our program's workflow and decision-making. We also want to continue to develop communication resources for our partners and anyone else concerned about FHABs in California. In our review of the bioaccumulation monitoring program, we found 3 areas in need of attention. First, we need to build stronger relationships with tribal governments and communities. We need to build stronger connections between our statewide program and other water boards, divisions, regions, and programs. And we need to fill data and information gaps regarding the question, is it safe to eat fish and shellfish from our waters, particularly for those communities and tribes that rely on fish and shellfish for subsistence and cultural purposes. And to do this, we developed a long-term realignment process to systematically address these areas. Each realignment cycle will be a 3-year process focused in a single region and will include a region-specific advisory committee. Each region's process will be led in partnership with the respective regional board, and the decisions and priorities are set by our regional advisory committee members, which are comprised of representatives of tribal governments and community-based organizations in the area, as well as other agencies that are involved in implementing our program. We began our first realignment cycle last year and quickly learned that much more time was needed for statewide tribal engagement. So we have created that time and developed a statewide tribal engagement plan centered on relationship and trust building, and are implementing that this year. Now, just the name of our program can be confusing and even off-putting for folks that aren't already in the field or doing this work in their day-to-day lives. So over the past couple of years, we've focused on developing communication resources like brochures and fact sheets and making it easier to find things on our website. And this year, we're giving a lot of presentations to a wide array of audiences to increase awareness of our program and activities, and hopefully to lower the barriers of engagement and participation. And just like with the FHAB program, we've done a lot of awesome work, but there's still more to do. Much of this work is focused on developing open, accessible, and interactive data visualizations that can help folks explore and understand the data and information we generate through our program and how it relates to them. But there's also more to be done on the communication and engagement side of things. Our website still needs a lot of work, and we're working with our tribal partners to develop a series of trainings to support tribes and others interested in conducting their own bioaccumulation monitoring. As many of you probably already know, doing this work can come with a potentially long list of challenges. Some overarching and persistent challenges that we faced are listed on the slide. The first is that the issues that we are setting out to address through our programs are technologically and environmentally complex all on their own. But on top of that, they're also interconnected with larger systemic issues of environmental, social, and racial injustice that exist and unfortunately persist in our world today. Second, all of our partners are doing so many things, and like us, are juggling heavy workloads, competing in important priorities, and limited time and resources. And so navigating the logistics of all of that is no easy feat. Truly operationalizing these principles in our everyday, boots on the ground work so that we can begin to actively and consistently put these principles into practice and begin to achieve the open science, equity, and justice outcomes that we seek. It simply is going to take more time, resources, and funding than we might think or be used to. It just is, and we need to accept that. And finally, my organization, like many, has large, complex, sometimes outdated and rigid data systems and infrastructure. So figuring out how to work within those or modify them or modernize them is no walk in the park. Well, those challenges are real. I have found that applying the following approaches to my work can really help. So first, for me, thinking about advancing equity, justice, and belonging also means having to think about and face and acknowledge and sometimes learn and unlearn and relearn the darkest ugliest, and most traumatic parts of our history and of our world as it exists today. All of those historic and current realities have real impacts on real people every single day. And that can be overwhelming and take a substantial emotional toll on me. So, practicing awareness, empathy, compassion, and care for myself and others is critical, and it helps prevent me from burning out. Next, be sure to prioritize projects that align with the needs of your partners. And the more alignment there is with the more partners, the better. And please, only meet when necessary. We have all been to meetings that could have been an email and they stink. So I try to avoid hosting those types of meetings at all costs. Third, we know it's going to take more time, funding, and resources to do this work. So let's start factoring that into our strategic plans, timelines, budgets, grants, contracts, you name it, so that we are transparent about our plans and our needs and can have the training and tools that we need to do this work. Finally, and y'all are probably experts on the benefits of this already, but we're leveraging open science principles and software to increase efficiency, transparency, and accessibility wherever we can. So with that, I will end here and thank you so much for your time and attention.